What's up, everybody? Today we are talking about mixing. Mixing is this idea that you can blend different registers in the voice together to create different kinds of sounds. There are two primary muscles that control the voice. We're going to call them the light muscle, which controls most of the process for the head voice, and the heavy muscle, which controls most of the process for the chest voice. Remember that the light muscle allows the vocal folds to lengthen and get a little bit thinner, and the heavy muscle allows the vocal folds to get shorter and a little bit thicker. Even though one muscle has dominant control in a particular register, the fact that the other muscle is still involved is one of the most crucial components of understanding how mixing works. When we are mixing between the head and the chest voice, what we're essentially doing is playing with the ratio of how much each muscle is involved. Mixing essentially gives a person a wide palette of vocal colors to paint with. This is really important for people who maybe want to sing in a variety of different genres and styles. It's also one of the most important components of healthy belting, which we will talk about in a later video. So practically that means I can pick a relatively high note. This is a D5, and I can decide whether I want to make this sound head dominant or light muscle dominant. Or I can decide that I want it to sound more chest dominant. That is, I'm involving a little bit more of the heavy muscle in the process. This is one of the primary differences between contemporary styles, especially ones that involve belting, and classical singing. So a great example of a song that can be sung with different levels of mixing is Pretty Funny from Dogfight at the key change. If I were going to sing this almost exclusively in head, it might sound something like this. Isn't it funny? If I were going to sing it in a head dominant sound that still allowed the heavy muscle to be involved, it might sound more like this. Isn't it funny? But if I wanted more chest voice or heavy muscle to be involved in this transition, it might sound a little bit like this. Isn't it funny? Pathetically naive. And that's a more chest dominant or belty kind of sound. Essentially what's happening there is that the light muscle is still allowing the vocal folds to lengthen, because remember, in order to sing higher notes, the vocal folds have to get a little bit longer. But the heavy muscle is allowing them to retain a little bit of thickness, which is what keeps that more robust sound that is commonly associated with belting. I cannot stress enough that when we mix, both muscles are still involved. Now, when it comes to sensation, it's helpful to think back to that diagram we talked about in the vocal registers video, which depicts the different places we might feel where the sound is coming from when we're singing in different parts of our range. This is important because whether I'm singing in a head dominant or light muscle dominant sound, or whether I'm singing in a chest dominant or heavy muscle dominant sound, the place where I feel that sound should be about the same. For example, if I were to sing this note in a head dominant sound, I feel it about here. If I were going to sing that same note in a chest dominant sound, I still feel it about here. If you're trying to sing high while keeping the vibrations from the low part of your range, that's where the voice is going to get overloaded. We have to allow the sensation to change regardless of what style we're singing in. At the end of the day, singing should require pretty much the same amount of effort throughout one's range. If it feels like I'm using a lot more effort to sing high notes than I am to sing low notes, there's a good possibility that you may be pushing too hard. If I sing this with too much chest involvement, that's super uncomfortable for me, and it's probably uncomfortable for you. What I really want to do is get more involvement from the head muscle. It still sounds pretty much like a belt, but it's way easier for me to sing and probably easier for you to listen to. One image that really helps me to understand how this give and take works is sort of this idea of yin and yang. This is this concept that you've got these two forces involved. In our case, the heavy muscle and the light muscle. There's a little bit of give and take throughout the range, and depending on what kind of vocal quality you're looking for, but they're both involved most of the time. Even when I'm singing low notes, I usually want to incorporate a little bit of that head quality. This is a D right above middle C. If I sing this pretty much entirely in chest voice, it might sound something like this. It's pretty strong, pretty powerful, maybe a little bit abrasive. If I incorporate just a little bit of a head quality in that, it sounds like this. It's just a little bit more under control, and mixing allows us to have a lot more control in our sound. That second sound feels a lot easier to me as well. Some of my favorite exercises for learning how to mix come out of this book called Cross-Training in the Voice Studio by Mary Saunders Barton and Norman Spivey. The idea behind cross-training is to both develop head-dominant sounds like those in classical music and more chest-dominant sounds or heavy muscle-dominant sounds that are more common in contemporary music in order to develop balance throughout the range. If you're constantly using one muscle over the other, what can happen is an overbalance, and so the muscles have a difficult time coordinating. So these exercises and this type of training is really, really effective for getting balance throughout the range. The first exercise is to work primarily the head voice. So for women, you'll start up here and you'll go it'll be a staccato sound, very light, very hooty. For men, you start down here in your falsetto. You can continue to take this exercise up pretty high, just make sure you're staying really light. The second exercise is to work on what we call the head dominant mix. So that is, there's a little more involvement from the heavy muscle, but it's still really a more classical, lighter type of sound. For women, you can start around D5, that's the octave above middle C. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. This exercise takes you through the middle part of the range, and so it sort of forces you to incorporate a little bit of that lower register as well while staying light. For guys, you start around C, the octave above middle C. This is pretty high in your range, so it's going to require a lot of attention between mixing those two registers. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Remember, you're still wanting to stay head or light muscle dominant in this exercise. The final exercise is to really focus on the chest register. So for women, we're going to start at a G below middle C. This is pretty low, and we're going to sing pretty much entirely in chest. And take it up. Now, it's really important that you don't take this up too far. You don't really want to take it above a G above middle C. For guys, you can start this exercise the octave lower. So what we've done now is really warm up all the different aspects of our range. We did the head voice, we did the chest voice, and in between we did a little bit of light mixing in between the two. This sets us up really well to be able to access all the different colors throughout our range, and it prepares us to learn about belting, which we'll do in the next lesson. Until then, see you later.